观众朋友大家好，我是 YouTube 频道天亮10分的主持人张天亮。台湾大选呢还有1个多星期就要投票了。我们都知道习近平一直对台湾虎视眈眈。就在12月26号，在毛泽东诞辰130周年，习近平在发表纪念讲话的时候还说，我们的祖国必须统一，也一定能够统一。中共一直想吞并台湾，让台湾人失去自由民主，生活在和中国大陆一样的没有法治、没有言论自由、信仰自由等基本人权的社会中。但中共呢也知道靠武力拿下台湾几乎是不可能的，因此一直想通过渗透和控制台湾的政党和社会，达到不战而屈人之兵的目的。因此这次选举也关乎到台湾未来的自由和安全。为此我们特别推出了一个节目，就是台湾大选2024牵动世界格局的选举。我们前面呢做了7集，从武统的可能性、统战、渗透、信息战、经济、中国大陆的人权法制现状和外交等方面，告诉给大家一个真实的中共和台湾所面临的威胁。当然，自由社会对台湾的支持也会极大的加强台湾的安全。今天呢，我们就推出第8集，也是最后一集，就是采访一些外国的政要，请他们谈一谈对两岸关系的看法。这一次的主持人呢是自媒体的新锐 David Zhang，他也是 YouTube 频道 China Insider with David Zhang 的主持人。下面呢，我们就把时间交给他，希望我们提供的内容能让您在1月13号投票中做出对台湾未来最有利的选择。
各位观众朋友好，我是 China Insider 中国内幕 YouTube 频道的主持人 David Zhang。对于2024年台湾大选，以美国为首的自由世界对台湾的未来走向十分的关注。美台关系也代表着世界秩序、国际安全、自由贸易、科技发展等多方面的走向。而在这个关键时刻，美国政界与学者们又是如何看待这次台湾大选的，以及中共威胁台湾的未来呢？我这次将与3位在华府智库或曾在联邦政府担任重要职责的专家们讨论这次话题。第一位是前东亚及太平洋事务助理国务卿大卫史代卫先生。空军出身的史代卫先生在历代美国驻华首席武官中是第一位履新前即学习过汉语并拥有长期涉华涉外区事务经历者。第二位是前川普政府美国国家安全会议主任艾利克斯·格雷先生。他于2021年加入 AFPC 智库，担任国际安全事务高级研究员。他的工作重点是美国在印太地区的安全和国防战略，以及美中在全球的竞争。第三位是哈德逊智库的高级研究员莱利·沃特斯先生，他的专业领域包括国际贸易政策、投资法规、技术和创新、网络安全以及经济与国家安全的交叉点。他同时也是东亚政治事务专家，主要关注的是日本和台湾。作为美国来讲，台湾到底代表着什么？
The number one thing is a shining example of democracy in Asia. It shows not just Asia, but Chinese people everywhere that democracy is an option. It is one of the strongest economies in the world. It is a strong technological partner. It is the world's leading semiconductor manufacturer.
Why is America important to Taiwan in this sense?
America has been and should always be Taiwan's greatest friend. I strongly believe that whether it's culturally, economically, and ultimately militarily, the United States and Taiwan share values and they share interests. The interest of the Taiwanese people is to preserve their freedom and to preserve their autonomy, and that interest is totally simpatico with American interests. And so I think that there is an absolute necessity for us to strengthen ties across all areas of society and all areas to strengthen ties between between Taiwan and the United States. In addition to the values and the shared values of democracy and freedom and self-expression and pluralism, from a pure strategic interest standpoint, if Taiwan were to be occupied by the CCP, it would provide a platform for them to project power well into the South China Sea, and I would argue into the Western Pacific. It would put the Philippines, it would put Japan, treaty allies of the United States, at a tremendous disadvantage strategically and operationally. It would threaten U.S. territories like Guam. It would put Palau, which has a compact of free association with the United States, in a position to be coerced. There would be ripple effects throughout Southeast Asia. from an alliance management standpoint, I think it would cause numerous actors in the region and globally to question American commitment and American capability, and we would see a bandwagoning a bandwagoning effect towards the CCP. So I think in order to maintain that strategic balance in Asia that we've maintained since 1945, I think Taiwan has to preserve its status, and that's a fundamental American interest as we think about what the global order looks like.
中共要破坏的就是在台湾所代表的一切与中共的鲜明对比。Do you think the people in Taiwan really understand the danger that's being posed by China right now?
I don't know. I mean, I was there in August. It was interesting. We got basically feedback, and we asked the same question: will Taiwan resist, or will Taiwan just acquiesce? And we got two very different answers. One saying, the younger generation understands and will, fight to defend, and the others saying I've heard slogans out of Taiwan: it's not worth dying over. It's not worth bleeding and dying over. In 2018, the election went one way. In 2020, it went completely opposite direction. I have confidence. This is the beauty of democracy. People are allowed to share information, and even tainted information will sift out. It will shake out, and eventually something close to the truth will pan out.
在中共党魁习近平2012年上台后，对台湾的进攻开始实际部署，而在同时，也将在改变台湾现状的可能性更大化。
We do see Xi Jinping, as President Biden said, as becoming a dictator. And so there's definitely a lot of concerns there about sort of at different levels. One, whether the right information is even getting back to him, whether he's able to, consider all the options, or is it really just, is he surrounding himself with yes men at this point, where, his decision making becomes just not as comprehensive as it really should be. I do believe that the PRC is changing. It's blaming others for its change, but really, I think really a lot of the change is coming from within.
中共长期都在武统台湾和意识形态渗透上同时进行。
When the PRC says war, they're talking about economic warfare primarily. They're talking about information warfare for sure, and any number of other tools that they have. Why would you invade and destroy most of Taiwan when, given an election or with certain economic tools, you get people to vote the wrong way and it peacefully falls into your lap? That's really the more elegant solution than invading and blowing things up.
美国人民在外交上最常问的问题就是中共会不会武力入侵台湾，以及美国会不会介入。台湾与美国的双边关系在2016年以后出现改变。这个话题也似乎成了台湾问题的代表性话题。然而，美国在川普政府时期开始，渐渐地从模糊政策走向清晰。美国总统拜登也曾4次宣布，如果中共入侵台湾，美国会介入保护台湾。那么，为什么美国对台湾的自由和民主看得如此的重要？ But is the U.S. ready to do that for Taiwan, to be involved in a conflict?
Look, I think that there is, as you said earlier, general consensus between Republicans and Democrats on the importance of Taiwan as a strategic partner. And I think that there's general consensus on the importance of Taiwan to U.S. national interests and keeping Taiwan's autonomy in the face of CCP aggression. I think that's absolutely one of the few areas of common ground in Washington, D.C.
I believe so, and the reason is this. It could be the Taiwan Relations Act. You could count any number of things. But look at Ukraine. The U.S. hates a bully. Period. That's it. We hate bullies. And it's sort of a knee-jerk reaction. It's a visceral thing. If we see a bigger country, because Ukraine, the whole point of Ukraine was being called into question prior to the invasion in 2022. Ukraine had its own problems. It definitely had corruption issues and all that stuff. But as soon as the Russians crossed that border, we go, okay, forget all that. We cannot allow this makes right behavior. I firmly believe the U.S. government will take the same, and U.S. people, American people will take that same approach to go, however we feel about either this aggressive, offensive activity does not work in the modern world. We can resolve these things through dialogue, without coercion and use of force, as we agreed to with the PRC and the 3 communiques. So, yeah, absolutely. The American people will There are many, many examples. Iraq in 1990, 91. George Bush was supposed to say, he was supposed to take a neutral position on that, but, at the end of that speech, he ad-libbed, "This will not stand." And he said it 3 times. And everybody in the Pentagon went back to work and goes, "I guess we're going to do something about this." Look at the record. Where there's bullying like this, the American people get their blood up and they will go do it.
在过去的1年来，中共持续加大对台湾的军事压力，包括海军军舰和空军飞机不断逼近台湾的领海和领空。对这一点，几位的看法是这样的。
The daily incursions around Taiwan too, I understand that these are becoming a drag almost on the military preparedness of the Taiwanese military. It's every day if you have to fly a sortie to sort of intercept whatever's going on out there. It's that's fuel, that's operations management. It's a lot going on, and of course the Chinese don't really care. The Chinese are going to continue to do this because they have a multifaceted desire to continue these operations around Taiwan. One, not just to show that they are there and that they want to intimidate the Taiwanese, even though it doesn't work. We've already seen the Taiwanese people are not necessarily threatened by the PLA. But it does allow them also to begin to integrate new systems into their operations as they continue to plan and prepare for an invasion if it were to ever come to that. In particular, for example, we see much more integration of drones, for example. Those drones are being flown around Taiwan to show that they are able to circumvent the island. It's a continued progression in sort of their military capabilities, which I don't know if Taiwan or really the United States is necessarily preparing for at the end of the day.
And so, your background with national security, and when you look at the constant flyovers that China has been doing around the Taiwan Strait and around Taiwan's air defense identification zone, and then you look at also what China's been doing recently in the South China Sea against the Philippines, and so on. Do you see this as more of an overall increase in aggression from China, or is just simply one of the tactics very much just to destroy the confidence of people in Taiwan? Where do you see, or do you see it's a combination?
I think it's a combination. I think that the salami slicing, as we called it, 10, 15 years ago, I think that those tactics remain a very, very much a part of the CCP playbook. But look, I would also say that it's not just a question of the tactics. I think you have to look at the tempo, and the tempo is rapidly increasing. We're seeing more and more aggressive actions constantly passing the median line in the Taiwan Strait, which was taboo a year ago. And now it's happening on a regular basis. Looking at the growing number of incursions into the ADIZ by Chinese fighter and bomber aircraft. Looking at the fact that during Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, the PLAN encircled almost the entire island, something that had not happened in living memory. So, we're seeing this growing tempo of aggressive, as you mentioned, the tactics, the growing tempo of aggressive salami slice tactics, not just with Taiwan. We're seeing it in the Philippines. We're seeing it with Australia, with the acoustic attack on Australian divers off the coast of Japan. We're seeing it in the East China Sea. We're seeing it with more and more border incursions in India. We're over just across the Indo-Pacific. We're seeing China pushing the boundaries as much as they possibly can on the military side. Every American president is confronted with a stark choice as we look at the PRC's aggression growing and the rhetoric becoming more bellicose. And ultimately, that question is, as you look at the policy of strategic ambiguity, and President Biden has moved away from that policy in multiple statements affirming his intention to come to Taiwan's aid militarily if it came to that. But every president's confronted with, regardless of how they approach the question of strategic ambiguity, in the event of a crisis, would they order the United States military to intervene? I think, the real question for me is, does the United States have the deterrence capability and the warfighting capability to step in and to help Taiwan in that event, regardless of what decision the president may or may not make.
What's interesting is that because we're seeing the increase in the number of flyovers around Taiwan, you're seeing a bunch of aggressive maneuvers around the South China Sea. To many people, at least to regular people, it may seem like they're preparing for something with the military. So is this part of this long-term fear-driving aspect of the PRC, or is that like just because they need to respond to it in terms of the manner that's being presented, that they have to look strong and to look like they have the ability? It's like a projection. What do you think that's the case?
Yes to all. For one thing, it gives them more confidence working in the Taiwan Strait. It gives them more confidence flying around the island they can actually do that. I'm waiting for one of them to run out of fuel and divert into Kaohsiung or something like that. That would be awesome. Whoops. I'm pretty sure they would bail out first. But that's part of it is this military messaging. But I think also it's trying to assure Xi Jinping they can actually do what they say they can do. And look, it backfires most of the time. Look what they've done with Korea in the Yellow Sea. They have multiple times flown almost into Korean sovereign airspace, disrupting completely unnecessary, annoying the Koreans when they do this. And they do the same thing with Japan. That's the same thing they accuse us of doing. They're doing the exact same thing against Japan near Okinawa and those things. So they're talking out both sides of their mouth. The last thing is they've got countries who are on the fence, like the Philippines, who were under Duterte. And they have successfully driven the Philippines back into its alliance commitments and its dependence on the U.S. to support it in its security needs. And this goes back to the Sierra Madre and Second Thomas Shoal, where the PRC is completely destroying any credibility they have, getting the Philippines firmly back in the U.S. court. And now we've got others working with the Philippines, not just the U.S., helping them defend their sovereignty. We need to point more to the 2016 Tribunal on the Law of the Sea ruling that says, the Philippines EEZ is the Philippines EEZ, and PRC fishing, oil exploration, and all the rest is illegal. Let's go back to lawfare, and let's make that point. Taiwan, too. Make that point that, these are all part of international law the PRC claims to support. They pat themselves on the back as being signatories to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, yet they ignore it completely. Let's cause some reputational damage and make Xi Jinping call uncle when the legitimacy of the Communist Party continues to be called into question.
最重要的问题来了，中共会不会攻打台湾？这个问题，三位学者都有不同的看法。So recently, Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen said that China right now, not original quote, but to paraphrase, that it's not in a position due to internal struggles with the economy, with its public and so on, that it cannot invade at this moment. But does that mean to you that it won't invade perhaps down the line, or that China is giving up on the idea of invading with military force?
Well, I have tremendous respect for President Tsai, but I would say on this question, I think we need to look at history and we need to look at kind of how the Chinese Communist Party makes decisions and how Xi Jinping has positioned himself in the CCP power structure. Right now, the Chinese Communist Party is facing a real crisis of legitimacy over the short and medium term. They have made their existence and their legitimacy about economic growth. And as economic growth goes to nearly zero in the coming years, as youth unemployment has exploded to the extent that they've stopped calculating and releasing the statistics, I think I have real concerns that we're looking actually counter to President Tsai's comments at a very real period of danger caused by CCP malfeasance in government, their inability to manage the economy effectively, and in just overall economic challenges. I actually think this may be a more dangerous period than anything we've seen in recent times.
So my opinion is, people disagree with me, and I'm not suggesting that we just back off and not do anything. I say we should build up military deterrent like nobody's business in the Pacific, just to make sure that Xi Jinping doesn't consider the military tool. We have to deter, but that's not the way I think he wants to go.
The option to use force in reunification has never changed. They've always upheld that they could use force, though that is not necessarily their preference. I'm in the camp that I believe that what President Tsai has said and what the U.S. Department of Defense has said in the past, and that there is no immediate threat to Taiwan. That means, take it what you will, 6 months, a year, and no immediate threat. 2027 is still a far way away. Certainly that scale of military activity we could see coming quite ahead of time. And so
2024台湾大选是中共近期强力干预的目标。据台湾权威消息人士指出，主管统战的王沪宁在12月初在北京召开过高级会议，与会单位其中还包括国台办、统战部、中宣部、商务部、国防部、国安部等多个部门，进行所谓化整为零、又拉基层的阴谋。2024大选后谁来执政？这对美国对台政策会有很大的变化吗？来听一听专家们的观点。
Well, I like to think that the United States and Taiwan can continue to maintain a robust relationship like we've seen these past several years. I understand that, there is a big difference in opinion in dealing with the PRC when it comes to this election, which of course makes, I think, the future of U.S.-Taiwan relations a little bit more questionable. I'm not saying that we're going to abandon it, but of course there's going to be, I think, some movement in the margins. There's definitely going to, if we see a DPP win, I think we can definitely expect to see a lot of the same efforts we've seen these past 7 years. If the KMT wins, I definitely expect to see more of a relationship at arm's length. So maybe not so many congressional visits to Taipei, and certainly a lot more dialogue between Taipei and Beijing. So, I like to think, though, that even with whoever wins, I think we can still maintain at least some level of relationship. Obviously, we are important partners, the U.S. and Taiwan, and I think we can maintain that for quite some time.
I think that's going to be determined. And so on that one, whether it doesn't matter what party wins, someone in that government, whatever it is going to have to reflect on what happens if the message coming out of Taipei goes a certain way. And if it goes that way, it would be very difficult for us to continue, or at least to be as open in sharing weapons sales and all those things. Pakistan's a good example in this case, by the way. In 2010-11, when I was at the headquarters Air Force, the decision was made to sell our best Block 52 F-16s to Pakistan, partly because somebody imagined they might be a security partner, but partly as part of a relationship builder to demonstrate confidence and trust. I can't say definitively if it happened, but I can tell you from things I saw at the Zhuhai Air Show, etc., a lot of that super sensitive capability information went straight to PRC. So if I can't depend on an arms partner to secure those weapons and to secure those tactics and secrets, I would be foolish to continue selling those. So again, there's hopefully for the people that might be thinking about going a certain way, that they'll reflect on the larger global examples and ask themselves if that's really how they want to go.
Their leaders understand that gravity, and that will lead to decisions about what sorts of weapons to buy, how to position themselves on the world stage, what sort of doctrine and tactics are needed to effectively deter and, if necessary, win a war against the CCP. And I also hope that by making those decisions, the Taiwanese people and their leaders will show Americans of all political persuasions that we have an obligation, that the Taiwanese people are serious about their self-defense, and that the Americans have an obligation to come to their aid and provide, both in peacetime and in wartime, the capabilities that Taiwan needs to secure its freedom. So I think this is synergistic. Taiwan owning its own defense, being realistic about the threat, will help directly contribute to Americans' willingness to support them in their time of need. So that's my hope.
They learned their lesson in '96 that if you threaten Taiwan and overtly scare Taiwan, you're going to get the other result. So it shows that the Communist Party can learn. So they've gone a different route this time. You've seen that at least some reduction in threatening activity. and the increase in meddling inside Taiwan's information space has obviously increased. So what we see here is them trying to walk away from the damage they took in 2020 with absorbing Hong Kong and what that did to the election of 2020, and they're trying a new tack, a kinder, gentler, fuzzier panda tack. And I'm afraid it might work, because where elections and information security and information warfare goes, people can be very susceptible. They could be manipulated in the information space, especially if you don't see a clear Chinese Communist Party hand in information. So there's danger there.
就像史代维先生之前提到的，在没有开始战争之前，所进行的便是信息战、经济战、认知战和政治战。美国政治战 Political Warfare 书作者凯利·格尔山内克写道，最终北京寻求动摇台湾领导阶层的稳定，挫伤台湾民主的士气，并破坏其主权地位，以致台湾要么自愿加入中华人民共和国，要么内部变得如此虚弱，它无法防御军事攻击。其中一步还包括让美国在台湾地区的影响力，即使不是致命的，也要受到严重的损害。还有对中共的政治权威构成了生存挑战的台湾的民主整体，其信誉要受到损害，并被有效的摧毁。还有中华人民共和国取得了无可争议的政治、军事、经济、外交和文化的主导地位，最初是在整个地区，最终在全球范围内。那如果要孤立台湾，那么中共就要挑拨离间，让美台关系冷化。这其中呢，还包括把美国视为控制印太地区棋子的背后势力，把台湾也形容为其棋子之一。那么这种说法真的对吗？ Is this worrisome for people in Taiwan because one of the point in which the PRC uses I guess you could say a political warfare or a cognitive warfare or even propaganda is to say that the Taiwanese people are pawns of the United States to achieve a so-called greater geopolitical objective in the region. Should the people in Taiwan be worried that somehow, whether whoever's in power is going to get a different approach from the United States when it comes to the general relationship?
That narrative, I always find it very offensive. Beijing doesn't use that narrative just with Taipei. They use it with Tokyo. They use it with Seoul. They use it in Manila. They use it all throughout Asia with countries that have a partnership with the United States. And what it does is it completely ignores the agency that these countries have and decision making that they have for themselves. And so, I don't think necessarily that the people of Taipei should be worried about the future of the U.S.-Taiwan relationship, even if there is a party change. Again, the U.S. position has not changed, and it will not change whoever comes in. I am worried that the PRC has been and will continue to step up these cognitive and disinformation campaigns against the Taiwanese people. Of course, it's not new. We experience this every election, but it is becoming, I think, they're getting much better at it, let's just say that. And so we're seeing a lot more efforts to not just, I think, sow distrust between the United States and Taiwan, but even within Taiwanese society, because at the end of the day, the PRC just wants to completely assimilate and reunify with Taiwan, preferably not to even have one, right? It will be under the PRC. And so they're going to do whatever they can, and they're going to continue. And it's not just in the information campaign space, I should say. It is in the military space. It is in the economic space, that they will continue to sort of threaten or sow distrust or whatever they can to convince the Taiwanese people that the PRC is the future.
And the interesting thing is there's a talk right now, and this is... I've noticed it in the academic world here in the United States, is this idea of maybe Taiwan should be one that's changing its manners or attitude towards whether that's the Taiwan independence or towards the current status quo, which is that rather than China backing off, it should be Taiwan that's reforming its current idea so that it stops drawing, you stop drawing the aggression from China. It seems to pin the blame more on Taiwan than the PRC. What's your view on that?
Well, look, we have that in the U.S. today. I mean, things that are clearly not our problem. We have, I'm going to use the word self-hating people who are looking for utopia. They want a perfect world, and therefore we're going to destroy what we have and we're going to build up something from scratch, from the very bottom up, and that this doesn't work. The system is 99% correct. It's got flaws for sure, but our goal is to build a more perfect union. Not perfect, a more perfect union. The same goes with our relationship with Taiwan and all the rest. Things change. Politics change. The global situation changes, and therefore our approach to it needs to change. But the foundation is that we support Taiwan. We are obligated by law to support Taiwan. And I'm not saying there aren't things Taiwan could do to damage that. There definitely are. But I think the Hong Kong example will keep people from following that path.
Yeah, I think that too often, just globally, Taiwan has been viewed as part of the China issue rather than as a freestanding, autonomous, self-governing entity of its own. And Taiwanese politics, Taiwanese democracy, as we're evaluating these things, they need to stand on their own merits. Taiwan has an incredibly vigorous, pluralistic, messy democratic system, and I would be loath to connect how Taiwan conducts its internal politics with anything the CCP is doing. The CCP is targeting Taiwan's democracy because it proves that a ethnic Chinese autonomous region can operate as a functioning democracy. It puts a lie to a lot of the CCP's propaganda. And it's part of the CCP's reason for existing, bringing about the end of the century of humiliation and all of the nostrums we've heard for decades. So the CCP is going to pursue its agenda regardless of what happens, whether the outcome of one Taiwanese election is one thing or the other. It's going to pursue its agenda. And so I would be very loath to try and view Taiwanese politics as somehow a part of anything that's going on the mainland. I think we deserve to, I think the Taiwanese people deserve to be treated for what they are, an important self-governing actor on the world stage whose politics are independent of what the Chinese Communist Party choose to do or not to do. Certainly not using Taiwan for anything. With the United States, our interest in Taiwan is that the people of Taiwan are free to maintain their autonomy and their freedom and their self-government. And by doing that, by allowing Taiwan to choose its own path, that keeps a significant chunk of the Indo-Pacific in the hands of democratic, freedom-loving people, rather than having a significant, geographically important island under the control of an aggressive, totalitarian CCP regime. And so, from my perspective, David, this is not about America using Taiwan. This is about America and the world benefiting from Taiwan's freedom, because the contrast with that, the alternative to Taiwan maintaining its current freedom is a totalitarian CCP regime spreading its tentacles like they did in Hong Kong, like they've done in Xinjiang, like they've done in Tibet, onto one more part of the world. And I think most freedom-loving people across the globe understand what happens when the Chinese Communist Party takes control. It's bad for human freedom. It's bad strategically, and it's something that all of us in the free world should want to resist.
同时，中共在一直试探美国的对台政策，看它有没有降温或者变化。
I do worry that, of course, the PRC is changing and forgetting that this is the United States position. We just saw recently when President Biden met with Xi that he had to remind Xi that this is what our policy is. I mean, it seems that we have to remind Beijing a lot more frequently, quite often.
It's a couple things. We have the Taiwan Relations Act, which makes very clear our obligation to ensure Taiwan has certain self-defense capabilities. And I think that's an obligation of both Congress under the TRA and the executive branch under specific actions that have been taken going back to the Reagan administration to ensure that Taiwan can maintain its autonomy. Xi Jinping is, I think, making a decision that's slowly evolving that it is in the CCP's interests to have a more assertive and aggressive national security foreign policy tempo because they have tremendous legitimacy issues that are coming to the forefront every day in China. And the best way to divert attention from those issues is to have a increasingly assertive global posture. And my prediction, David, is we're going to see more of that and not less in the coming months and years.
其实离台湾不远，仅700公里就可以看到一个已经被分化、瓦解、渗透和意识形态方面各个方面已经被摧毁的香港。今天的香港会不会是明天的台湾呢？
I don't think anybody in Hong Kong wanted to import the Chinese Communist Party system into Hong Kong. Those on the pro-establishment side, from what I could tell with my conversations, simply wanted to prevent the PRC from taking more than they wanted by, in their own view, forcing the PRC to inflict more communism on Hong Kong. So they thought by giving just a little bit, if I just give China, PRC just a little bit, they'll back off. Well, I hope our Taiwan friends were paying attention because they won't. They're voracious. You give them a little, they're going to take everything. You cannot give, you have to stand for. Period. And I'm also encouraged by the Hong Kong example because it has gone so badly. Every day, every week, there's a new story in Hong Kong saying we were told one thing, but the PRC reneged on that deal. And that advises the people of Hong Kong. And Taiwan, also part of this one country, two systems false promise, empty promise. I hope the Taiwan people are studying the Hong Kong example very closely.
I think this is actually a prime example of why the PRC cannot be trusted. Even if there were some significant change, and there would have to be a significant change because the structure of the Hong Kong-China relationship and the cross-strait relations, the Taiwanese government is completely different in its structure than the Hong Kong authorities. And so there's, I think, a lot more structure built in. Obviously, there's the ROC has its constitution, it has its various branches of government and judicial system and things that are independent of the PRC, while within Hong Kong things were a bit different. And so a lot of things would have to change. But even if a lot of those things were to change and Taiwan were to reach somehow a level of relationship as Hong Kong was with the PRC, again, it just goes to show that the PRC is not to be trusted in maintaining whatever agreement they agree to. It's not reliable.
其实不难看出，问题的根本在于台湾的未来是由人民自己所决定的，是投票选出来的。而如果轻易就送给了中共，那其实连选择的机会都没有了。作为美国人，对这次台湾大选到底希望看到的是什么？
Well, I think that people in Taiwan need to be realistic. I think people in Taiwan need to be realistic about the threat. They need to be realistic that Xi Jinping is utterly determined in his tenure as General Secretary of the CCP to unify Taiwan with the mainland. And I think that Taiwanese people need to have a clear-eyed view of that threat. Just like the Ukrainians between 2014 and 2022, I think had a very clear-eyed view of the threat from Russia. I think, and that led to them making some very responsible decisions that helped prepare them in the interim to ultimately resist the Russian invasion when it happened. I think that type of mental and emotional preparation helps lead to making the right procurement decisions, the right strategy decisions, the right alliance decisions. And so my hope is the Taiwanese people understand the gravity of the threat.
We are committed by law to certain things, to provide articles of military nature to help Taiwan defend itself. And therefore, no, I'm not worried that there's going to be a major shift. That's the first part. The second part is more than any administration writ large, the DoD, I think, understands the importance of Taiwan. And so you won't see any sudden changes, I don't think, out of the Department of Defense to either abandon Taiwan or whatever. But there is a third caution here, is if we get as we had in Japan with the DPJ, Democratic Party of Japan, in 2009, that decided they were going to maybe walk away from the alliance and spend more time trying to cultivate the relationship with the PRC. It does make the relationship more difficult, and the level of sharing possible is going to decrease. But my point was, if we hide PRC malfeasance, if we don't expose it globally, it's going to continue. Why don't we just maintain a record of, the pandemic cover-up? I mean, there's so many things that we have them dead to rights that we can inflict reputational damage, and we can conduct information warfare of our own. But again, the U.S. system, unfortunately, still leans way too much on the military arm and not enough in the information space. If you read the National Defense Strategy of 2021 or 2, it does talk about integrated warfare. And what that means to me is I spend a lot of time with my friends in DOD trying to get them in State Department to start talking to each other more. We've been allowed all this time to let them work independently, and in general, it's worked out correctly. We're now in a foot race, and we've got to get more efficient, and we have to get more reinforcing instead of independent. So if we can get state and defense to work together, something like political warfare will result.
For the United States, the position's not changing, and even if there is a party change within Taipei, the official position will not change. Again, I think if there is a party change in Taipei, the differences between, let's say, now and in a year from now, I think will really be, again, in the margins. It'll be at the sort of the public level that we'll see much more of the change. But underneath, I think the currents will continue to flow.
问题在于美国能帮到台湾什么？
We are selling weapons to Taiwan again. We've always been doing that for decades now. I think we're going to continue to do that, and hopefully we are giving them the right weapons that they need to defend themselves. Training, I think, is also increasing. We're increasing a lot of bilateral military operation training, Coast Guard training, that sort of thing, to increase their preparedness. But I think there is a question of preparedness, whether this is enough, whether the Taiwanese military is necessarily prepared, and whether regional forces, U.S. forces in the region, are also preparing for this kind of scenario. That's just on the military side, and there's a lot of military experts, I think, out there who have probably a much more comprehensive opinion on this than I am. My interest has actually been recently on the economic side. Taiwan is very heavily dependent on the Chinese economy. There are a lot of American companies that are also dependent on the Chinese economy, and of course Japanese and Korean and other Asian countries as well. So that's not to belittle this kind of statement, but there does need to be more, I think, resiliency built into the Taiwanese economy.
So I think that's a major part of the obligation of the U.S. government. But I would go further. I would say the U.S. government has an obligation to help expand, not just maintain, but expand Taiwan's global presence, Taiwan's international space, if you will. I think part of the challenge here is that the PRC has been conducting an aggressive influence operation globally to decrease the number of formal diplomatic allies that Taiwan enjoys and to put pressure on countries to curtail the scope of their engagement, the scope of their relations with Taiwan. I think we need to be very clear, whether it's at the United Nations, whether it's at specialized international organizations like the World Health Organization or the International Civil Aviation Organization, that Taiwan is an important member of the international community, and that we have an interest as the United States in seeing Taiwan participate fully in those international organizations and international space. So I think the U.S. government can be very proactive in showing our friends and allies that we want to see Taiwan play that global role.
And so it's things that I think the Taiwanese economy, Taiwanese businesses, Taiwanese government really need to keep an eye on. And it's something I think the United States could help with as well. Obviously, we have trade negotiations going on. I wish these were a little bit more comprehensive. I wish we were investing more in a U.S.-Taiwan free trade agreement. I wish the United States was in the CPTPP so that we could help Taiwan ascend into this regional trade agreement. But of course, there's a lot that the United States, I think, could do. It's just not necessarily doing it because of our own domestic politics.
And that's the important question, I think, was to ask you about, would an increased or a more comprehensive trade relationship with Taiwan be the way in which it could build a stronger relationship perhaps even more than that of a military one, because I view this as sort of you're not really breaking the official position of the United States on Taiwan, but you're also increasing or decreasing the demand for Taiwanese merchants to go to China, whereas now you're increasing it with the Western world.
I think it can help. I don't necessarily, want to put too many eggs in one basket. I think it needs to be all of these things at once. And then also a recognition at the end of the day that none of us are giving up the Chinese economy. The United States does hundreds of billions of dollars worth of trade with China every year still. There's semiconductor equipment companies that 20% of their annual revenue comes from sales to China, and so there is a recognition. There should be recognition that we can't necessarily just give up China, but I do agree that we can shift a lot of that away from China. We can invest more in Southeast Asia. We can invest bilaterally. I think some of that, while it is necessary to negotiate these things bilaterally, from a U.S. perspective, the United States has some own inward looking to do in order to make its own economy more competitive internationally. We do have high labor costs. We do have a lot of regulatory barriers. There's federal law, there's state law, there's county laws, there's all kinds of things that make it hard for businesses to invest in the United States. Even though we are a desirable market, we are the world's consumer. We're going to buy things. I love to buy things. That trend's going to continue, even if, as we've seen over the last few years, even if there is a significant economic shock, the United States is resilient. And so a lot of it is inward looking, but in that regard, even with that, I think there is room for negotiations in order to increase the U.S.-Taiwan economic partnership and help Taiwan build some of that resiliency away from China.
那遏制中共的办法是什么呢？
President will continue some of the things that President Trump and Secretary Pompeo and my old boss, Ambassador Robert O'Brien, undertook to try and strengthen Taiwan's international standing on the international stage, advocating for more, not just observer status, but member status in international organizations, pushing back hard when China flipped diplomatic recognition. These are all policies that I think there's broad bipartisan support for, and I'm hopeful that the next president will be able to push them even more aggressively as a way of deterring China and strengthening Taiwan's role on the international stage.
Or, as I am fond of saying, weakness breeds aggression. So for every bad move, for every provocative activity, we have to react. And we have to react with strength. And people say, oh, you're just now escalating. No, you're not. Actually, you're telling them that we are going to respond and you should probably de-escalate. That is, anybody who's observed how the PRC operates, it's exactly, they do not respond well to kindness. If you give a little, they'll take a lot. The more you respond to provocation, the more they'll respect you. I mean, I like to think, you tell me, but I like to think we accomplished that during my time in the Trump administration. Instead of responding with weakness, we closed the Houston consulate and said, you're not going to get away with stealing our vaccine data. You're not going to get away with your, quote, diplomats manipulating our internal domestic politics, and we're going to shut that down. And guess what? They stopped doing it. You just have to respond with strength. It doesn't increase the probability of war, it decreases it. We have to learn that lesson.
Is that a good approach for Taiwan as well when it comes to dealing with the CCP?
I think so. Hong Kong tried the kind approach, right? They tried the let's give them a little, let's negotiate, let's be reasonable approach, and what they get for it. I do think that Taiwan, along with its partners, I mean, Japan has come on strong, the U.S. has come on strong. You've got lots and lots of Philippines. You got lots and lots of people in the region like going, look, and here's the thing, it's, whether you care about Taiwan's sovereignty or not, what you do care about is the disruption that conflict will cause. What it's going to do to the global economy, what's going to do to the regional economy, shipping. If there's missiles and bombs flying around, look what's going to happen to energy shipments, trade, all that stuff. So everybody has an interest in this, and I think we need to keep hammering this, but everybody needs to understand that the last thing you want is to encourage the PRC to do something ill-advised, provocative, aggressive. weakness breeds aggression. Let's show strength as a group, and just tell PRC not today. You've waited this long, you can wait one more day.
And I just thought about this because you mentioned it, the domestic politics in the United States, because right after, so January is the Taiwan presidential election, and then 9 months later we have, or 10 months later we'll have the American presidential election. Is that something, because do you think Taiwanese people are looking at the future of America as one of, we have our new president or a continuation of the current administration in Taiwan, but what if something happened in, the United States, a different president comes in or the same president? Is that something that they're worried? Have you seen stuff like that?
I'm not worried at this point. It really hasn't come up, I think, as much in the debate. And then even when it does, it tends to be very positive, I think, or at least supportive of Taiwan, in that, realizing that China is America's greatest threat at this point. And so shifting more resources to Taiwan is in the United States' favor. At least I think that tends to be the current theme right now. So if anything, a new administration, whether it be Republican or Democrat, could actually end up providing more military support, military training, those sorts of things. But it's still a bit too early to tell. A lot of things can also happen between now and November of next year, there's 10 months is a long time. I'll just say that, especially in American politics.
2024台湾大选代表着世界格局的走向，在这时刻，台湾、美国对抗中共的未来，选择权在台湾人民手中。感谢您的收看，我是 David Zhang，再会。